Welcome to PokerStrategy.com, your professional poker school. This video focuses on the last part of the short stack strategy, the game from the second betting round onwards, i.e. after the flop. Whether you invest money once the first 3 community cards have been dealt or during later betting rounds, primarily depends on how you hit the community cards. If you hit a good hand, you should go all in. If not, well, you'll have to wait and see. What hands can you keep? You already know what the best hands are, for example a straight or a flush, from the article on the Texas Hold'em playing rules. In the short stack strategy there are a few additional exceptions however, for example 3 different types of pairs, the middle pair, top pair and over pair. What is a middle pair? You have a middle pair when both of your whole cards already make up a pair, and there is exactly one higher community card that is not an ace. You might be holding pocket jacks in your hand for example, and then the flop comes. 4, 8 and king. That's when you have a middle pair because there is only one higher card, the king. What is a top pair? A top pair is a pair made up of one of your whole cards and the highest community card so far. If you have an ace and jack for example, then you will have a top pair if the highest community card is either an ace or a jack. What is an overpair? An overpair is a pocket pair made up of your 2 whole cards which are both higher than the highest community card. For example, if you have 2 aces and there are only undercards on the flop, you have an overpair. What is an OESD? You have an OESD, open-ended straight draw, when you have 4 cards in direct sequence, such as 4, 5, 6 and 7. Indirect sequence means that the cards are running in order. You need a 5th card at either end of the sequence to complete a straight. Only then you will be able to play this straight draw. You should never play the hand if you're missing a middle card to complete a straight, for example if you're holding 4, 5, 7 and 8. The OESD in the example is made up of the card sequence 9, 10, Jack, Queen. As is generally the case in Texas Hold'em, it doesn't matter how many of your 2 whole cards and how many of the community cards you use for this hand. You can use both your whole cards and 2 community cards, or 3 community cards and just one of your whole cards for a draw. It makes no difference. What is a flush draw? You have a flush draw when you're holding 4 suited cards. What is missing from this draw is a 5th card of the same suit to make a straight flush. How to play your hand. You've raised before the flop. If you raised before the flop, the game is relatively easy. You try to bet all in on the flop with any of the hands shown in the previous slide, or with better hands like a flush of course. So you ought to play a middle pair, top pair, over pair and any better hand, plus OESD, open-ended straight draw and flush draw. How to play. If no one has bet so far, you should bet 2/3 of the pot. If somebody has already bet, go all in immediately. If you bet and someone raises after you, go all in straight away. If your bet costs you more than half your stack, go all in straight away. If opponents only call your bet on the flop, then go all in on the turn immediately. What if your hand can't be played? If you have none of the hands mentioned previously, you will usually just fold and not invest any more money. You might be able to see the turn card without having to put any more money in the pot, and you might have the chance of turning your hand into a pair or better. In that case, just continue playing like you did on the flop. There are 2 exceptions on the flop, however. Here's the first one. If the pot is already twice the size of your stack at the start of the betting round, then you go all in, regardless of what your opponents are doing and what hand you are holding. Here's the second exception. If you raise before the flop and only have one opponent left, you should always bet about 2/3 of the pot. It doesn't matter what hand you are holding as you are bluffing here, but this only goes for when you have just one opponent who has not bet anything so far. If the opponent raises, you fold. If he calls your bet, you should give up the bluff. Unless of course you manage to improve your hand with the turn card by turning it into a middle pair or over pair for example. In that case you go all in on the turn. You have not raised before the flop. The situation changes if you haven't raised before the flop. This usually only happens if you're in the big blind and no one raises before the flop. Firstly, you don't play a hand that still needs improving, so it means you don't play an OESD or flush draw. Secondly, you no longer play a middle pair and only play a top pair if your second whole card, the kicker, is at least a jack. So what do you play? Top pairs, at least a jack kicker, over pairs and any better hand. How to play. If no one has bet so far, you bet 2/3 of the pot. If someone has already bet, go all in immediately. If you bet and someone raises before you, go all in immediately. If your bet costs you more than half your stack, go all in right away. If opponents call your bet on the flop, go all in on the turn right away. We will now show you how to put the rules explained so far into use by explaining a few examples. The article that goes with this video contains further sample hands. You are sitting in early position and hold ace-king. Of course you raise this before the flop and the big blind calls your raise. He checks on the flop. Although you haven't hit a pair or better, your opponent is showing weakness. He is also your only opponent, so the chances are good that he will fold if you bet. The size of your bet should always be about 2/3 of the pot. In this case you will place a bet of 55 cents. You can estimate the size. You don't need to calculate it exactly. If you bet 50 cents or 60 cents, you will not be making a mistake. The important thing is that you do actually bet. If the opponent would call the bet, then the round would be over for you for now, unless you manage to improve your hand on the turn or river. Once again you've raised with ace-king before the flop and the player in the big blind position has called. This time he bets on the flop, but you've now hit a strong hand, the top pair of kings. According to the strategy, you should go all in if an opponent bets before you and you've hit a playable hand, so you push all your chips into the middle. Here is an example for the so-called middle pair. You have pocket queens, raised before the flop, but the flop brings a higher card, the king. So if your opponent holds a top pair of kings, for example, he has a better hand than you do. You can continue to play your hand as normal nevertheless, as long as the higher community card is not an ace. In this case, however, you would not only bet, but go all in straight away. You should do this because of what the rule says. If a bet costs you more than half your stack, you should go all in immediately. Normally you would bet about 2/3 of the pot. That makes 80 cents. You still have $1.40 left, and half of that is 70 cents. So your bet would clearly cost you more than half of your stack, and you must therefore go all in here. Here's the summary. In this video you learnt that if you raised before the flop you can play middle, top and over pairs or better. Additionally you can play an OESD, open-ended straight draw, and a flush draw. If you didn't raise before the flop you only play a top pair, with a jack kicker at least, or an overpair and of course any other better hand. A middle pair is worthless if one of the community cards is an ace. Bluffing is only possible if first of all you've raised before the flop and secondly you only have one opponent on the flop. So that's a short stack strategy, probably the smallest and most effective hold'em strategy in the world. The important thing is to stick to the rules. The very mathematical nature of this strategy doesn't allow to deviate from them, even if you think you have good reason to do so. The team at Poker Strategy wish you lots of luck at the tables.